Good morning, everybody. We're here to, as Ken mentioned, to discuss how new project management software is enabling greater success within the infrastructure and transportation vertical. My name is Todd Procaccini. I am the client executive for Kahua. Kahua is a project and program management software geared for public sector owners to help transportation agencies manage the entire life cycle of their projects. So we have a very distinguished group of panelists. I know there's been a lot of conversations around technology initiatives, AI, emerging technologies, so we'll probably touch on a little bit of that from a project management perspective. But our group of panelists are also going to talk about successfully implementing and rolling out technology, from an adoption standpoint. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the group to make introductions, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussion, starting with Arthur.
How are you, everyone? Pleasure to be here. My name is Arthur Tereshchuk. I'm a partner of Capital Project Advisory and Transformation at Superset Infrastructure. We're based both out of Canada and United States.
Hi, good morning. Barry Brown. I'm the Director of Operations and Maintenance at Naples Airport Authority. And happy to be here. It's a nice drive this morning. 95 is as usual. So thanks for having us.
Martin Astazarian with Onindus, Senior Implementation Manager. Have over 15 years of standing up data management systems for the capital construction space, and looking forward to the conversation today.
I'm Gaurav Saxena. I'm a manager at Deloitte in our Infrastructure and Capital Projects Advisory. So we're not just accountants and auditors. We provide a range of services from program management, project controls, funding and grant management, technology selection and implementation, and program monitoring, process improvement.
All right. Well, we'll get into the discussion. I'll start with Gaurav. Gaurav, from your perspective, if you were engaging with a new client, what would be some of the best practices that you would share with them when evaluating different technology stacks as they go through a due diligence process?
Yeah, so what we have been seeing with organizations is they are starting with the single idea of implementing just a project management tool or an enterprise asset management tool or a planning tool. But now with the interconnectedness of technologies, the reliance on sharing data and collaborating, it's more than just implementing that single tool in a vacuum for one specific department, but stepping back and taking a comprehensive look at your organization and seeing what are the different tools you need throughout your capital program lifecycle, and how do you come up with a roadmap to implement the right ecosystem of capital planning, forecasting, project planning and execution, asset management. So it's, again, not just a single project or a single program for a department, but trying to understand everything that you will need for a 5, 10, 15-year capital program and its success.
And just a follow-up question to that, when you look at the group of players involved, from a resource perspective at an organization, you have business, you have IT, sometimes you have procurement. What would you say is the appropriate group of stakeholders getting involved? Because historically, the business would select the technology and then shove it down IT's throat, and that has some negative adverse effects. What are your thoughts on just giving advice on the right group of players to have those conversations?
Yeah, so coming from personal experience, my original background is in construction management, so don't forget your end users. They're the ones who are in the fields, in the trenches, day-to-day executing your projects, making the organization run and reach its goals. So they have a lot of valuable insight and input and feedback that can make your program and your technology ecosystem a success. So take into consideration their needs, their challenges, their views, and what they think would improve their jobs and make things better. I think more specifically in the public sector as well, technology has enabled more community engagement and stakeholder engagement and feedback. So try to implement and utilize, platforms and social media that can get the community's input and feedback, but also show the success stories. People want to see that, projects, more than just like the roadway project being built and seeing that physical, structure being put in place, what your government and your municipalities are doing to just do business better, run better, use tax dollars better. What are their bigger visions and plans? And everyone's busy, but social media and technology has really enabled people to be connected and get that feedback and real-time engagement with their government much better. So,
All right. Martin, a question for you. When you look at an implementation of software, the old saying is people, process, technology in that order. How important is it prior to the organization moving forward with a technology going through somewhat of a technology assessment or an internal assessment of their current organization's culture and ways they currently operate versus their desired future state?
Well, it's foundational, right? Many times I've implemented systems where that didn't occur, and it simply failed because the systems were selected as the solution in and of itself, right? But there was no conversation, there was no expectation setting, there was no understanding about the potential pains of change management associated with it, right? And one thing that I've been hearing a lot here with regards to what we're talking about and what other panelists have shared is we're definitely looking into the future, and we're looking at other technology that's going to help us tremendously improve the way we communicate, improve the way that we gather information. But what I've discovered and what my team has discovered is that most programs and most organizations have a plethora of data that they have no idea exists, and they have no idea what to do with. And I think that that's probably step one, understanding what you're working with, because at the end of the day, any system that you implement, the purpose of it is to tell a story about where you are and where you're heading, right? And there's an art involved there to do that, but technology is going to facilitate that. So,
And I think you gave a good piece of information, taking the technology out of features and functions and what's really the business value of the technology to the organization. I know in the public sector, it's a little bit harder to go through an ROI analysis, versus the private sector. But I think that's a good segue into a question for Barry. And Barry, represents the owner side. So it's good to get your perspective. When you're going through an analysis of technology, you look at maybe cost versus benefit. What are some of the conversations that you've had internally at Naples Airport when these new technology solutions are presented to you and your group, in engaging the right process of looking at these different alternatives?
Sure. Well, so I'm really happy to hear about the investment and time to really learn about the organization, what the needs are. I think getting your foot in the door is number one, right? And we can all sit here and listen to all the benefits that the technology has, but at the end of the day, you have to convince the people that are going to be running the system, using it day in and day out, that this is going to be valuable to you. A lot of times there are varying reasons why that does or does not pique interest, and so it's difficult to basically get your point across, right? You have to have the opportunity, and then if you're going to learn about the organization, we have to talk to you. So I think mainly in the conversations, because we largely rely on consultants to handle our project management, from design, even a lot of the bid process, and then of course construction. But we have 40 projects on the books right now. 40. I mean, we have a small team kind of managing that, but we don't have a lot of technology behind it. And, that's just something that, we have to continue to work on, because we're using electronic methods, but it's not some whiz-bang system like I keep hearing from these guys. Right, yeah. So I think that's the main hurdle is getting your foot in the door, learning enough about the organization, and then the change management is massive. Naples is not the only airport I've worked at. One of my previous airports, we had a nationwide developer of technology that we purchased through the city for lots of money. And the process was terrible. It was. And it was just mainly because, the system did a lot of things that it really needed to do. But when it came to the people that were using the software the most, they weren't in it. They didn't seem to have any say-so. And then when it was pushed down to them, the training wasn't there. Really, the indoctrination, the culture didn't change to utilize it properly. So those are some of the conversations. Those are the concerns that I have when we start talking about technology adoption.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a great point because, on the software side, when we're engaging with owners, there's a term called multi-threading the account, and getting different perspectives or viewpoints from different stakeholders that would be involved with the technology. So not just the executives, but actually the field personnel. So I think that was a great point. Arthur, a question for you, and I'll start with a statement, but I know that you have extensive experience working with some of the largest transportation owners in North America. For the group, can you provide maybe some differences when it comes to technology for solutions that are specifically geared for transportation and infrastructure versus maybe vertical buildings, based on your extensive experience?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think that's a perspective that I've really started to develop about 10 years ago after I did a couple of years in the energy and nuclear sector. And what became very evident as far as technology is concerned, you really have three pillars. Your residential and commercial is pillar one. Then you'll have your energy and utilities, which is pillar two. Your pillar three is going to be infrastructure, heavy civil, and different types of infrastructure assets, both across transportation, airport, et cetera. Now, they all will have nuances, but they're not going to be as drastic as when you go from one pillar or one silo to the other. So what I mean to say is the way that your technology stack or the type of solutions you'll be using when you're doing utilities work or energy work is going to be completely different, or more different than not, than when you're doing an infrastructure project. So that's where a multitude of different solutions comes in. And we had an interesting demo with another technology provider recently. And when you listen and look, and so they'll present it like they'll do project management, but when you look at them, you go right away, they're from the energy sector, because it's a sure sign that certain things are going to be underplayed, and those things are generally like document management. They'll have stuff, and it'll technically be there, but it's not going to be there in the manner in which it's accessible and consumable by the end consumer or the user of that system. And that refinement, I think, is what separates different solutions from one another. And then the other component is there's other functions. Everybody knows about scheduling, everybody knows about work packaging, integration, et cetera. Different solutions do it different. And so within each silo, you're a consultant or a system integrator, they would know, or they should know, some of these differences. The challenge is the business can't necessarily tell. You hear buzzwords, you see pretty screens, everything looks fine, and you think that's the right fit without knowing that down the line you're going to be limited technically, or it'll prevent you from maximizing the value, because purchase of any system or technology is dependent on return on investment. You're saving time, which makes the business case to get this system in, or you're improving your data quality, which then leads you to some other opportunities down the line. So that's a challenge that I think is very difficult to overcome, because it's industry by industry. And a good way to kind of a good question to ask from the business's side is, who else is using it within my market sector? And we are seeing that come up frequently. It's coming up more and more, because that lets you know, if they've been successful, we will be successful, because we're in the same type of business together.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when you look at horizontal versus vertical, the difference between even the contracting methods, whether it's, lump sum versus unit cost, I think the technology has to support, that more from a horizontal perspective. Gaurav, a question for you. I mean, you're working for Deloitte, obviously one of the largest professional services companies in the world. What would you say from an emerging technology perspective, or some of the things you're hearing or seeing when it comes to, new technology? I know we're throwing around these buzzwords and acronyms, these days. I think for construction, digital twin, AI, but what are your thoughts on some of the emerging technologies that you've been kind of discussing and sharing?
Yeah, so definitely the buzzwords of digital twin, AI, ML. But before getting into all of that for an organization, they need to iron out their processes, procedures, and existing tools, right? There's no single tool that's going to magically do everything and hold every piece of data that you have and analyze it, right? It's going to be several tools. For us, we're seeing, or I'd like to say, like the three pillars of capital programs would be ERP, PMIS, and enterprise asset management, or EAM. There's obviously subsystems in between that provide, various tasks and functions, but you establish those three main pillars for your technology ecosystem for your capital program, and then you can move into creating a digital twin using AI and ML for your analytics, make decision making, and just really advancing your program and kind of future proofing it. I think is like another term that we're seeing or we're hearing is, what tools can we try to implement now and connect now that are more future proofed, that will enable growth and expansion in the future beyond just a couple of years.
Barry, I guess, I don't know if you have any feedback on what Gaurav just mentioned, but hearing from your perspective, as an owner, of some of the emerging technologies that he shared, how does that coincide with your culture at Naples Airport?
Yeah, so a cool part of Naples is we're really, over the past 5 to 10 years, we've been a lot more attentive toward technology. And that's key. I mean, you have to first have an interest in it. And I like what you mentioned. We have to get our stuff together before your system can come in and do it. I think that's a misconception with regard to when we go out to procure technology. We're like, this will solve all our problems. Yeah. If you're putting a blanket on a bunch of problems, the problems are still there. And then the whole idea behind the technology that we're really seeking is that it's good information in and good information out. So a lot of the work that we've done is on those problems that exist today. The work order routing, asset management, tracking costs, tracking assets, just basic things, nailing down our programs. And when we start talking about digital twins and those things, like that's the goal, right? We really want to find the AI solution. We want to find the digital twin where we can simulate our operations. On our heaviest days, we're probably looking somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 operations in a day. That is very similar to some of the much larger airports that you see. So if we're going to have any construction on the airfield, if we have anything going on, we can look and we can think about how everything's lining up. But a good real world item that we were just discussing recently is we have about 5 airfield projects that are going to come up, and at some point they're going to overlap, maybe all of them. If all of them are overlapping and we're working across all these different geographic locations on the airfield, what's traffic going to look like? So bringing in our stakeholders, especially air traffic control, and letting them know that things are happening, and then asking them, hey, how do we work this from your side? Being able to incorporate that all into the process without knowing necessarily when to do it, those are the things that would really help us.
And I want to touch on one of the things you mentioned in regards to like asset management. I think in the industry now, that's a big buzzword. Polling the audience, most of you on the public sector side represent the owner, and owners view things in a different lens than contractors or consultants. Contractors are focused on projects. Owners are focused after the project's completed. Now we have to manage the long-term life of the project, which now turns into the asset. And so, Martin, a question for you. How important is it for whatever solution you're managing during the life of a project to have some level of interaction with the transition into moving from project to asset management and managing the long-term life of that building or asset?
So I think that we're seeing a higher level of awareness as to the importance of that, right? Many times I've sat down with people and, folks of all all levels, and they've told me something as simple as, hey, I drilled something into a wall and I hit a wire that wasn't supposed to be there, right? So that's a very simple and, non-elementary example, but the need for it is there, right? So it's important. What I've discovered through my journey in talking to folks through the implementation process is that you always have to have the end in mind. So whatever it is that you're implementing, it should always have a component or a scalability to the point where you know what's going to happen at the end of that project, and you know where that information is going to live for the benefit of the folks that are eventually going to have to maintain this asset or manage its life cycle, right? So, yeah.
Okay.
Can I just comment on that real quick? So that's massive, and I think that's one of the hurdles that a lot of us owners, wind up facing. When we build something, there's thought as to how long this thing is going to last, but how do we communicate what goes into maintaining it, and when do we need to start replacement? Those are aspects of the project that a lot of times just really get skipped, and we need that, right?
How do you track it?
Right, exactly. Going forward for the life cycle.
No, that's a great point. Question for Arthur. I think from the infrastructure transportation side, we're seeing a lot of money poured into infrastructure projects throughout the country, with some of the IIJ funding and others. In your experience, how important is it to establish, private-public partnerships and leverage technology solutions that support those partnerships to really, drive the efficiency of, funded projects and then delivering these projects?
Yeah. Well, just right off the bat, for those that are not familiar, public-private partnerships or alternative delivery is a multitude of different types of contractual agreements that have certain involvement of either external financing or other types of stakeholders are involved, or funding from multiple sources, et cetera. It may or may not involve a concession period of where the design builder is going to operate that asset for you. Being from Toronto, I can tell you that we're doing hundreds of billions of dollars of public-private partnerships. This is a model that's accessible at a federal government, Gordie Howe Bridge, that's going from Windsor into I think it's Detroit. Where's it go? Yeah, that's right. So that's a $5 billion P3, and spent most of my life in these types of projects. The differentiating factor there is it's a very specific delivery framework. It's got very stringent performance criteria on both the owner and the concessionaire, or they'll call them project-o, but for lack of a better term, they're your contractor, your vendor, and they'll be doing the design and construction of the asset. Keeping in mind that they will design and construct it in the way that they'll maintain it in the most effective way for 30, 35 years before they hand it over back to you. Getting an owner ready for delivery of a $5 billion project, especially if you're talking about somebody like Windsor Detroit Bridge Authority, which is an organization that they started one day, the next day they gave them $5 billion, the third day they signed the contract. So how do you get an organization like that ready to deliver very complex, multi-year projects that have impacted the last 30, 35 years? That was the challenge. What we found is there is a lot of owners that would like to execute these types of projects, but what's in the way is maturing the organization, maturing the PMO. Once that's done and you understand what you're going to do, then you need to bring appropriate collaboration solutions or PMIS solutions in that are going to manage the interface. And more so in conventional projects, because your concessionaire has what's called performance criteria on them, there is about probably 15 different processes that kick off if they don't submit something at one time. And the penalties if they don't deliver the eventual asset, if that bridge doesn't open on the delivery date, I think $250,000 a day, that's the penalty. So the focus and the pressure of maintaining contractual compliance, knowing exactly where everything is, and having direct alignment with the vendor and ability to escalate issues and resolve them effectively, the price tag on that is $250,000 a day. So when it's not done correctly, certain things fall through the crack. The relationship between the two parties for the time of the execution takes priority. At the end of the day, from the accounting perspective, somebody will come in and draw a line under it and tally everything up. And that's what has kind of left a bad taste in some people's mouths, because these contracts are not to be taken lightly. To be honest, from my perspective, I think that is generally the future of where we're going. I don't know if you guys have experienced this. Most of our clients have come back with feedback where before, if they could settle claims or disruptions with their contractors just by having a conversation and saying like, we'll sort it out, or maybe this and that, they're like, in the past 3-4 years, I've been told, absolutely in no way. Everybody's got a lawyer's phone number. I'm getting notices of intent within the deadline. I'm getting claims within 30 days, and they're ready to take us to court. So that's a maturity on the private side because they're getting squeezed for margin. I think the similar maturity is required on the owner side because your vendors aren't snoozing. For example, Toronto Transit Commission, which operates subways in Toronto, is on the hook for $3.5 billion in claims. The Toronto, I think, constructor organization had a meeting a couple of years ago. They said, let's stop doing all work with them, period. And that's the result of when the relationships take priority over contractual requirements and obligations.
Yeah, I think you hit on something too. I mean, that's something that organizations really don't touch on when looking at technology is how can we mitigate risk? How can we reduce, the number of claims? I actually had an organization that said if there was a claim, under $25,000, they just paid it because of the amount of time it took to gather the data to defend the claim. They just didn't have the technology in place. So I think that's a good point you brought up. Just from a time check perspective, we have less than 5 minutes, so we're gonna just go around one last time. When it comes to implementing technology, it's one thing to go through the implementation. It's another thing for the technology to be adopted and for the end goal to actually be achieved. I guess question for you, Gaurav, and I can also ask Martin you the same question. What are some of the metrics that you track to determine whether or not an organization is actually adopting the technology that was initially implemented?
Yeah, so with technology, obviously you can track usage, you can track who's logging in, how often they're logging in, what activity you're using in the system or making in the system. So defining those metrics as you go through the implementation process and creating those benchmarks to say, okay, we're trying to roll out a tool in phases. We want X number of people to be logged into the tool and trained. We want them to, be using, Y number of processes. And then also just getting softer feedback from surveys, from user experience interviews. Understanding again your end user. When you think about your end users, how is it going with this new tool? Do you have the resources available to use it? Is it making sense? So just kind of having a comprehensive adoption plan and program in place that lets you understand the hard data of what's happening in the tool, but then the softer data of how are people feeling about this rollout? Where are things we can improve and make it better?
Yeah, and the plan has to be well defined, right? The plan has to be a roadmap and a goal-oriented plan. Many implementations that I've done specifically at the beginning of my career where I've learned all my hard lessons, right? Even though there was a plan in place, there was no buy-in on the plan, right? One thing that was mentioned here is that at the end of the day, there could be a group of 5 people in a room involved in implementing a system, involved in putting a plan together, but at the end of the day, the people they represent within their program have to execute on that plan, right? So there has to be a communication strategy with everybody. There has to be a vision of what that plan and what the end result of that plan has to look like, even during the implementation, as you understand the system and as you understand the potential goals that you're going to achieve with the system. Another thing that I want to mention too is, and I want to kind of go back and before we don't have any time left, but I think a critical thing here is that whenever a system is selected, you have to understand who the target audience is going to be and who's going to be involved and who's going to be consuming that information, right? I've been in a lot of implementations where I have the VP sitting next to me at the table giving me processes, but at the end of the day, that person's not going to be in the system. They're going to be consuming the information. So I go back to the foundational thing that I said earlier where it's not only the gathering of the data, but it's making it tell a story so that that person, the person at the higher level who's making those, capital planning decisions, who's understanding the current position of the program, can use that information to their benefit. Right? And so little of that is happening. We just keep throwing technology and technology and technology, which is all good, but nothing is being pulled out of that. No intelligence is being pulled out of that. And I think, AI is going to be moving us in that direction, but still, what data are we going to put into AI? Is it good data? Is it data that was based on people actually buying into putting real good, solid, accurate data into a system? All of that matters. So,
No, thank you for that. We'll give a minute for Barry and Arthur just to comment on these last questions. But Barry, question for you at Naples Airport. Give us just a purview of some of the strategic initiatives that you guys are focused on over the next 12 to 24 months.
So strategic initiatives, we are presently, like I said, we have about 5 airfield projects. We have a capital improvement program of, I think, roughly around $20 million. That runs from the fuel farm, and I'll be using terminology, but the fuel farm where we keep all the fuel improvements made over there, that originally got pushed back because it ballooned from $3.5 million to $5.5 million. We have a number of taxiway changes that we're working on at the airport. Again, those are some of the things that are going to go right into our really big project where we're replacing every single light and sign, including all of the conduit and our airfield lighting vault, and that's going to be about a $14 million project. That's a massive undertaking. That's some Ian damage where we actually had up to 4 feet of water on the entire airfield, and the salt water damaged a lot of our equipment. So we're lucky to have it still, but we have to reinvest, and that massive of a project encompasses the scope of the entire airport, and so all those other little projects are going to fall in, so the phasing is important, and being able to translate that through a system are going to be really crucial.
Thank you for that. And Arthur, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. If you go over, I'm going to kick you in the shin. With that said, what would be, lessons learned that you can provide the audience on things that they should be thinking about when approaching the implementation of a project management solution or any technology to improve infrastructure projects?
What should they be thinking about?
Correct.
So, like any question, this is a complex question. If this solution is internally used and you're using it internally, it's one thing. If it's a collaboration PMIS, like what I think this panel is talking about, then I would say the number one thing is clarify your collaboration or interface channels with your external parties and stakeholders and try to align them to contractual obligations before organizational objectives. Square away what you're going to go to court for first, and then resolve the things inside of your house. That's the biggest thing. And also, if anybody's willing, I've prepared a number of presentations, which we don't have time for discussing, but I'm with Martin. You cannot just keep saying AI. You cannot keep saying digital twin. Notice how one shows up and the other one disappears. And then we're almost in time for AI to disappear and digital twin to come back. That's not the solution. You look at the markets that have done it successfully, which is your finance and your insurance, banking. What did they do? They implemented 2 things, GAAP and IFRS. And for those that are in the know of what that is, it's generally accepted accounting principles. I read a McKinsey study. Construction is second off the bottom. The only thing that's worse than construction in terms of procedural and digital maturity is hunting. Yeah, so that tells you something. I think that there is a bigger issue at the core. I think the solution to that is going to be the same as the solution in the finance sector. And I think the objective that we should all be aiming for here is highly structured, high-frequency, standardized data sets. You have that, you accelerate yourself up the list, same as banking. And then don't change anything. Do everything that they did, because they did all the good stuff. They did all the hard work. All we need to do is realize what it is that they've done and how to apply it across our market. Thank you.
All right. Well, for our chat panel, thank you for just sharing your experiences. And for the group, thank you for hearing us out today. As we approach the next sessions, Kahoot has a booth out there, so we'd love to meet you and continue the dialogue. Thank you, everybody.